What's going on, boys? Thanks to our patrons and Fiverr customers, subscribe to our Patreon free for behind-the-scenes stuff, arm yourselves, life stuff. The femininity bit of the last video seems to be more of a hang-up than I was expecting it to be, so we're setting aside time here to focus on that part. To begin, recall our stance on sex and gender. Gender is a labyrinthine set of behaviors associated or interwoven with responsibilities that need to be done. Gender starts with the responsibilities, and responsibilities turn into genders when those responsibilities get assigned to sexes based first on efficiency. Women, by default, won't be as good at killing one another with rocks in the rock age. And while I think men can lactate under certain circumstances, that's not what we're engineered to do. Responsibilities, the very important responsibilities, divvied up by efficiency, but then after the most severe essentials are covered, and this is where, or why gender and responsibility are different words, responsibility turns into gender. Additional responsibilities that are not or would not be hard limited by biology get bundled together again in the sake of efficiency. As in, while you're dealing with kids, why don't you whip us up something to eat? And then you do this for a while, and then gender gets really gendery because you add on top of it additional behaviors that are not biological. You attach them to these work sets, and over time you come to believe they are biological, and that's where you end up with people obsessing over masculinity and femininity as those words are popularly used, ignoring the fact outside those most severe essentials, cultures tend to take genders in very different directions. This is why I am in the gender camp. Gender is a social construct, and knowing that, we have the opportunity to construct it better, make it more efficient, because we're not in rock age anymore. But we say all this without dismissing the fact, one, there are biological differences, and two, they do have psychological impacts. But the trouble, and this is all trouble, everything we'll talk about in this video is a bunch of fucking trouble. Those psychological impacts are unclear because brainwashing is more effective than I think people are comfortable admitting it is. And gender is brainwashing. It'll get in so deep you won't realize it isn't natural. At the same time, on the biological, psychological end, it's frightening, especially for cultures like ours, to think we might not have as much control over ourselves as we would like to believe we do. Those biological, psychological effects are more potent than we're willing to admit they are. And of course, people will say, no, I love that, but people like these, they're all for only the things or only the aspects of the things that make or help give them an identity. Most people don't have an identity. They're also powerless and kind of stupid, so they will back anything that gives them an identity and makes them feel purposeful and powerful. What they won't acknowledge are the frightening, uncomfortable, and especially the disempowering, de-egoing aspects of anything. Biology most of all, because you can't do anything about it. So gender reaches down more than we know, and more than we're comfortable admitting, and biology reaches up more than we know and more than we're comfortable admitting. That's been one of my life's interests for some time now, trying to suss out where one ends and the other begins, and which things are biological and which things are socially constructed. That's also why the queer spectrum is important. They are nodes outside the norm, out in the dark of your understanding, that you can use either as starting points for new investigations or almost in an echolocation fashion to locate where things are in relation to one another. Now, we establish all this, which is already messy, because now we are getting into a spiritual component that hijacks these concepts to push its own goals. One of the many problems with having a language is definitions are not concrete. There isn't one universal language. And within all this wiggle room and evolution of language, words never just mean one thing. And I don't mean that just in the many ways people can use a word, but also in the ways people try to control words. They will fiddle with definitions, they will mess with associations or build associations. You'll have multiple people engineering one word at the same time. Words themselves, individual words, are brainwashing tools people will fight over. And language is hopelessly unable to connect with higher realms or lower realms. It's hard enough to use language on this plane. While we're here, by the way, when someone is trying to explain something to you that they think or that they do, they might be able to get close or to a level you both find satisfactory. And this is assuming they're being honest with you. But the best way to understand something is to watch them do it and look at their outcomes and watch them do it a bunch. Watch their methods and outcomes change in degrees words can't capture. If you want to know something, you need to see it for yourself. You need to feel it for yourself. This is why instincts are important. And this contributes to why communication past a point or on certain subjects does not work. You're communicating using a tool that is lacking and people are fighting over. In other words, you don't transmit understanding to people using words. And especially on one of these more difficult topics, the best you can do is try to make a person associate the words you are saying at them with the feeling you are trying to describe. Trying to make them get what you're saying, not by explaining it to them, but by signaling them this thing inside them is what you're talking about. And it's interesting because at that point, words are almost useless. I mean, they were useless, almost useless in the beginning. They're almost useless after you've made the connection, because the understanding is what you're trying to tap into. Words are not grand structures. At best, if you're trying to use them in that fashion, they're holograms. What words are, in fact, are bunches of bridges between feelings or experiences that are, to people, self-evident. That's why communication, a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, especially on certain things, is pointless. Words are never the thing. They are the front gates or the front lawns to the things that actually matter. That's another reason I hate philosophy, or the practice of reading the great philosophers until you have experience, real points of reference, and feelings about them. It's pointless. Even when you do have those points of reference, it still feels pointless to me other than as a sounding board, because once you have the experiences, you should be building your own philosophy for yourself. And we're going on a tangent here, but another thing I've been thinking about, people talk about universal human feelings sometimes. And in that way, there's this push, or there's this expectation that these universal feelings, because they're universal, are very general. I don't think that's the case at all. I think there are universal feelings, or something close to universal feelings, but those are very, very specific. And they're not universal in the sense that everyone has them or even can have them, but rather that they are things that can be had by specific people in specific circumstances. That's why I like INFPs and ISTJs too, actually, in this niche psychology sphere. Because it seems to me that's the shit they specialize in. Finding and cataloging and examining these very niche, particular, quotes, universal feelings. Or the combinations of feelings and experiences, rather. Now, why am I saying all this? It's because masculinity and femininity are some of the most intense battlegrounds in the language sphere. And I think that's because great powers already understand just how powerful gender is, or if not gender, then these words are, because they're related to gender. That's why in popular media, what is the conversation about queerness? It's either anti-queerness or pro-queerness, but in a really stupid, useless, interferency way. The actual queerness, the Manhattan Project, is going on behind the scenes in ways that are strange, suitably, necessarily. Some people, when they think trans man, they think confused idiot. Other people think trans man and they think king on a throne. And the average trans man walking around is a bio unit that exists to be used as interference, and then the actual one that you should be caring about is probably a wizard, and not some little pussyfoot one. In masculinity and femininity, that word's gonna kill me, I keep stumbling over it, levels. On one level, when you say masculine and feminine, you're talking about biology, your biological specifications, and maybe some of those severe responsibilities ideally associated with them. Women can go hunt lions if they want to. Men can breastfeed babies if they want to. But if they do that, they'll probably go into a file that doesn't exist. I don't mean to get Joe dipshitty political, but we talked about how shitty and addictive and evil news is, and how pointless all of it is. I outlined exactly what these motherfuckers do, and it still works on me. Anyway, next level, or a different level, rather, someone says masculine or feminine, you could be thinking about gender. The more particular, bespoke behaviors associated in all sorts of different cultures, all sorts of different behaviors, the complicated ones associated with the sexes. And an additional level to this, an additional level of interference or confusion, they could be talking about gender while meaning sex, getting them confused, or they could be doing any of those things, any of those combinations, and you could take it the other way. And then another level, This one's trickier because it's like an evolution of the fucked up version of the second one. But instead of an accidental misunderstanding, it is an intentional misunderstanding between two people, but the intentionality of that misunderstanding comes from outside both of them. This is an intentional misunderstanding because it's a hijacking of what is already a messy little battlefield. This other level, or this alteration of the second level, would be the spiritual element. And this is tricky because actually, everything we just said about the spiritual element of masculinity or femininity, those are associated with the thing I'm talking about. I guess the proper third level would be spiritual masculinity or femininity in the Jungian sense, lack of a better word, the anima and the animus, which is important, by the way. Everything up to this point I have not dismissed or am not dismissing yet. But that's its own can of worms by itself, because let's think about the anima and the animus for a moment. What is it? Or what are they? Masculine or feminine aspects, okay. What is masculinity or femininity? Or what aspects of them do you mean when you're talking about anima and animus? Is it the biological essential differences? Is it the mimetic societal gender differences, which I think are essential too? I think we're a mimetic society for the most part now, so equally important, if not more so. But then that opens up, or that reflects on all the problems with these words up to this point, or one of the problems we already mentioned, warfare over what these words mean. In a vacuum, reaching up into the spiritual side of things would be difficult. When you factor in the fact these two words have everyone fighting over them at all times, not just about what they're supposed to do, but also what they mean, it's a level of interference that is hard to wrap your mind around. But you need to, especially if you care about the spiritual side of things, because if you don't get it, then you won't be able to get it. Assuming there is a singular thing to get and not treating it like going through some kind of tunnel that mutates everyone in a different way. But then, finally, we get to the level I'm talking about, which is in the spiritual realm, but it's an outside force pushing a misunderstanding. Using the fog of war to smuggle in ideas that are poison to seekers. That's the femininity I'm talking about. But getting up to being able to say this is the femininity I'm talking about, that doesn't make anything less complicated, because it wouldn't be a good guise if there weren't, or if it weren't a suitable vessel. So let's step away from masculinity and femininity for a moment and think about the binary I'm talking about here. I was watching Jedi and Sith shit today, remembering how cool the expanded universe used to be, and the way to explain what I'm talking about hit me. Jedi and Sith. Right-hand path and left-hand path. And once you know, by the way, to look for the ways people push interference or guided thinking, let's say, around the paths, it's hard to unsee. Most people and forces in this world want people, if they're going to, or if they will be pursuing spiritual ascendance, to go for the right-hand path. And think about it, if the right-hand path is the path, or is a path of accomplishment and goodness, and this is the thing you should be pursuing, Why is every powerful person either a complete bastard or on that spectrum they understand bastardry and know how to engage in it well? Because the right hand path is for losers. It's designed to make you prey while believing you're noble, believing you're a good person, believing that the law of the universe or universal morality is on your side. It makes you prey. That's not the way this existence works. It teaches you to go against this game knowing you will lose by doing it. Because if you have spiritual potential, you if you're trying to teach people, that's another thing about these fucking magicians. I try to stay out of the magic sphere, is they're all misleading one another. Seems like at all times they're misleading one another. Especially people who are interested, might have potential, but don't know. They mislead them the most. And for the uninitiated, what is the right-hand path? Although by this point, if you're watching this video and you don't know what we're talking about, what are you doing here? The right-hand path is largely about viewing everything as one with everything else, dissolution of the ego, this idea of balance and oneness, and with that comes associated ideas, like all of these wannabe good person things that everyone talks about, but because it makes you feel good to talk about it, but in practice, in life, nobody does these things. And why does nobody do these things? Because they come at a cost. They come at two costs. One, the cost it takes you to do something or try to do something good without a reward in return. Or if you do one of these things, you try to get a social reward, of course. But you can do that without actually doing anything. And then the second price you pay, the second cost, is the punishment you will receive for trying to do something good. That's the way this world works. 100% of the time, I think the right-hand path is it's misaligned with truth. It's a lie. It is not at all what you're here in this plane to do. And then 99.9% of the time, for most people, it's fruitless. You're trying to go down this ego dissolution, quotes, good person, even though it's not necessarily good, it just has good things associated with it, path. You're doing it for ego reasons, you'll get nowhere. You are part of the system. You aren't something that will get out of it. But, of course, we make room for the people who do. Their call, the call they feel, is that path, and some of them walk it, and very few achieve it. They're unnerving. They do exist. You aren't one of them. They're unnerving because they've achieved a state that is antithetical to this existence. In their actions, and more importantly, in their outcomes, and most importantly, in... You don't have a third eye or a sixth sense, you have a second nose. Your second nose, you can smell something wrong with these people. They're like the very few wells from which all this washout right-hand path bait spawns from. It's like their existence gets used by either mortal powers that be or immortal powers that be to put people on a path they know won't get them anywhere and will make them easier prey. Yes, there is an apotheosis at the very end, but that's for very, very, very few people, and it's not what you think it is. And what is the left-hand path? If you like Morrowind, it is Chim. It's maybe even Amaranth. Boethia is all about that shit. best boy girl, Lorcan, the absentee god. Boy, wow, I didn't even think about that, but Kirkbride does it again. Things are lining up again. What was Lorcan's goal? What route does Boethia push people toward? Achieving Chim. In other words, achieving divinity to the level you don't need these gods anymore. It's like our Hecate Venus thing. Kirkbride frightens me. He's like 50 Cent. These people have played the game multiple times. And by the way, I should say, we're hedge wizards. We hedge in this shit up on this channel. So while I'm talking about right-hand path and left-hand path, I know if we go traditionally definitional, I'm sure I'm getting this shit wrong, but that furthers my point about the how useless words are most of the time. These are my definitions, my understandings of them. The left-hand path is taking your ego and raising it to the point you reach escape velocity. Or I still love that graph. If you're talking about right-hand path, the drop becomes one with the ocean. If you're talking left-hand path, the drop swallows the ocean. In other words to all this, I think the paths are... The world is a problem, and the paths are attempts to answer that problem. Left-hand path is all about heightening the self however one sees fit. That's why we brought up Jedi and Sith earlier. Most of the time with Jedi, they're hypocrites and they're creepy authoritarians. They tell you to walk a path that denies you your ego. But of course, you still have an ego. They still have an ego. It's like this manufactured failure control thing. Yet, there are some very few true Jedi. Because let's think about, if we're thinking about this in real life, imagine right-hand path people. What happens when Joe Dipshit tries to do right-hand path things, seeks the right-hand path? Nothing works. And maybe that's part of it. Maybe you're supposed to recognize the fact that on this, quote, good person path, you're supposed to recognize that goodness is not what you think goodness is. But it's very convenient that that will leave most people unequipped to deal with the ugliness of what the truth is. But then you do have those people who both are called to walk the path, can walk the path, and then when they do things that Joe Dipshit would fail in or receive bad outcomes in and punishments in, they receive rewards consistently. That's why I think there's something spiritually fucked up about all this, fucked up about the right-hand path. There is something wrong with that entire mindset. Something is wrong there. Versus the Sith, I know initially and in some interpretations it's framed as a strictly bad, self-destructive thing, but one of the reasons I liked the expanded universe so much was it's not good and bad necessarily. It's about the right-hand path and the left-hand path. It's about your ego and what you decide to do with it, if anything. Sith are all about embracing what you are and engaging in it to make you powerful. Oh, fuck, what is it? There is no peace, there is only passion. Passion leads to strength. Strength leads to power. Power leads to victory. Victory will set me free, or victory will break my chains. The Force will set me free, something like that. It's magic shit. They're talking about magic. They're talking about the great endeavors. The left-hand path does not ask you to deny what you are, to repress or destroy your ego. And a consequence of that is not turning out weak. It is developing power. And developing power by understanding or by accepting what you are and soul searching, but also understanding what this world is, which is bad. I'm at the point, I was thinking about this earlier. If we reached a point we took on, or were worth taking on apprentices, had learned enough that we could justify taking on apprentices, what would we teach them? Or how would we teach them? It wouldn't be, you pay me for my course, and then again I tell you what to do with your penis and all these things. It would be, in my opinion, the way I envision it, putting our apprentices in situations in which they are expected to perform right-hand path actions. You come here to learn the left-hand path. We make you walk the right-hand path, not because we want you to go that way, although it's your decision what you want to do ultimately. You came to me. It's so the world will teach you what it is. Given the right experiences, you wouldn't need to teach someone the left-hand path. You wouldn't need to convince them to walk the left-hand path. The left-hand path is a natural consequence of existing in this world and trying to be a good person, or trying to do more, trying to better yourself, trying to rise above. It's not the way the world works. Left-hand path is a natural consequence. If you don't lose and die and fail and give up, you're coming to us. There isn't another option. At least I don't know of one. If there is, tell me. Except don't, actually, I don't want to hear from you. Now, why this huge tangent about Jedi and Sith and the right-hand path and the left-hand path? Took a clarity piss, and I want to say this before we walk into another losing fight. I hope you can appreciate the fucking sprint labyrinth it is trying to explain what's happening here. It's like trying to explain something in newspeak. The language does not want you to be able to discuss it. So trying to find a way to make this work and keep it clear, it's almost impossible, and it almost feels intentional. Okay, helmets on, weapons ready. Let's go. Something outside wants to push right-hand path values on people, lead them into the right-hand path to make them easier prey. That's happening more often right now. It's happening not just more often, but more intensely. It affected me, and I don't know if this is a response to what feels like a coming shuffling, or if something else is happening. And this push is happening all across society. But gender identity... Oh, fucking Christ. Okay, gender is both, or triple, one of the most effective vectors. It's probably one of the most important vectors, and it's probably one of the most important vectors because of how well they have locked the way they're using this vector behind language. As in, if you see a huge fuck-off safe, you might not know what's inside, but you can assume it's probably important because of how big and fuck-offy the safe is. So, for some undetermined reason, something is pushing people toward right-hand path values through tons of vectors, but gender is one of the most important ones, or masculinity and femininity, because that's another trick. Sex, gender, spirituality. Those are levels. But you can also use the word gender not just to mean the mimetic differences, but also as a replacement for masculinity and femininity by itself, but that locks up, or it makes everything, it crosses the wires in a fucked up way that makes things more confusing. Pushing right hand values, gender as an important vector. Gender is an important vector. It's wearing masculinity and femininity as a mask. Now, last time I said femininity is demonic, and I didn't get as much into masculinity, because that's another difficult part of this. Femininity. And when we say that, we are not talking about one of the levels. We're talking about it in a general vague sense because that's the way, that's the generality and the vagueness is what makes it a good mask, because it's hard to tie any one thing to it or to figure out how it's operating behind the mask. Femininity is an effective way to push right-hand path values. I think that means they're in one of the levels. I don't know if it's the biological level or the mimetic level or maybe even the spiritual level. One of those in one of those aspects of femininity is something that makes pushing the right-hand path easier. It matches up. Now, the issue with that is, let's think about gender femininity for a minute. I think, one, we're all feminized. That was why that sex distinction was important to me yesterday. Even dudes walking around trying to be super masculine men are feminized. They are effeminate. They are feminine. But that is so pervasive, we don't even know what a true alternative would be. That's why I explicitly said yesterday, we're using the word femininity here, but we aren't talking exclusively or even primarily about women. But again, that's part of the mask, that's part of the trickiness, because what if those sex differences are both what make femininity, in the general vague sense, a better transmitter for right-hand path values? If that's the case, then that would explain part of it, because femininity women are, to my eyes, better vectors for right-hand path pushing, but it can't be all sex if that's the case, because, again, it's in men thoroughly. So I need a graph for this. So if women are more receptive on the sexual level, then it travels up into the gender level and then transmits into men and then saturates them on that level, completely saturated, effeminized society. But again, if that's the case, we're assuming it travels up. Maybe it was always on the mimetic level and then went over and then goes down. But talking about all this, the assumption is, this hidden masculinity is the answer. It's the way out. It's the rejection of all of this, or the solution to this pushing. And it's also not. Because masculinity, on the sex level, on the gender level, on the spiritual level, although it is greatly reduced, whatever you want to believe true masculinity is on any of those levels, it's also compromised. and is used to push right-hand path shit. Who alive, right now, would tell you you should be narcissistic? That you should prioritize your needs over other people's? That you should do what you need to do that's the best for you solely. People will do things for themselves and then justify it to themselves in a number of ways, but justify it only in that you did it because it is the best thing for you. You will get that from nobody. Almost nobody. Both genders, sexes, and spiritualities, anima and animus, have all been compromised. Because you think either you fall for the big trap, or you recognize there's a problem, and then you run to this other thing because you're trained to think strictly in binaries. Thank you, queer people, for giving us the idea of exceptions or alternatives. You run to the other side of the binary, and it's the same fucking thing. That's why yesterday I said femininity is demonic, because it is the primary vector through which right-hand path trickery is getting pulled. Because we're such an effeminized, effeminate people, all of us, totally, femininity is demonic. I'm talking about, I'm not, that's another part of why this is difficult. I am not just talking about its application as a carrier for right-hand path diseases. I think in femininity, and this is the scary part, is it more of a gender mimetic thing, or is it more of a sex genetic thing? That's spooky. That could fuck everything up. It doesn't matter. Well, I mean, it does matter, but for what we're talking about right now, it doesn't matter. Femininity is, and I don't think it's just the fact that it's used primarily because it's so pervasive. I think there is a natural receptivity to right-hand path values in the feminine. But again, is that mimetic or is that genetic? That's a fucking nightmare horror question. I want it to be mimetic, but I don't know. Again, doesn't matter. Femininity is demonic because it is allied with right-hand path stuff. Oh, and I want it to be mimetic because that would further my argument that at our base levels, at our sex levels, while there are differences, they're not as intense or as much as we believe them to be, but the ones that are there are very important. And I hope in all this, it's the case that the feminine receptiveness to right-hand path values is mimetic. Well, I don't just hope, because some of the best left-hand path people have been women, so you're trying to solve one problem. You're trying to solve one Rubik's Cube that is made up of 17 other interlocking Rubik's Cubes. You can, at best, you can work out maybe what you're looking at. It's not just an incomplete picture, it's an incomplete picture made up of other incomplete pictures. But for now, that's outside our scope. What am I talking about when I say femininity is demonic? First, more accurately, the right-hand path is demonic. Or at least the way it's being used is demonic. Femininity is demonic by extension because it naturally accepts, spreads, and is vulnerable to right-hand path thinking. That's why it's demonic by extension. Tricky because we're all effeminate. You don't just hate the plague, you hate the rats it rides in, or you don't just hate a virus, you hate the wind that carries it. That's probably the better one. Except it's even worse in this case because this construct is supposed to be sentient. So this is a choice. This is a bad thing, and we are predisposed to choosing to push it, to spread it, to enforce it. And what I missed yesterday is I should have said masculinity is demonic also, but to be most accurate, to take a step back, I should say the present gender binary is demonic because it's being used to pipe awful shit into people's heads without their realizing what's going on. But then you can step in and say femininity is demonic for the reasons we've outlined. Masculinity in this demonic system is also demonic because although feminine ways of pushing right-hand path stuff is popular right now, there are also masculine ways to push right-hand path shit. And we are actually beginning to see that a bit more. All, might I add, in the same time window as you're seeing people becoming more left-hand path. Joe Dipshit isn't becoming more left-hand path. Hundreds of thousands of Joe Dipshits aren't becoming left-hand path, but you don't need hundreds of thousands. You only need a few. There can be only two. Doesn't need to be many. One potent left-hand path person is a problem to the powers that be. I don't think it's a mistake you're seeing right-hand path values get pushed harder and in cleverer ways. To the extent it started to work on me again. After we spent... I talk about the time I spent working hard to get into this mindset so I could take a break later. It was long for me because I'm not an old man. I don't have tons of years under my belt. But in the grand scheme, that was not a long time at all. And it's no mistake that it started working on me again. Making me second guess. Making me feel like I needed to justify myself for reasons other than this is an ugly kill or be killed reality, and self-interest, mixture of self-interest and the call, you really can't undersell the call, but self. In spite of everyone and everything self, needing other justifications, feeling guilt, wanting approval, wanting to connect and be reconnected. The ultimate cost, of course, being either volunteering to make yourself prey, or, at the very least, hesitating when it's go time. When you can't hesitate. That's all it takes. If they can make you hesitate one time, that's one time too many. But then anyway, back to the masculine side, that's also demonic because you have the male vectors or forms of pushing right-hand path shit. But I don't know. They're both... I think humanity, because of what it is, which is awful and lying, And for most people outside the masters are awful and lying, right hand path stuff works, whatever form it takes, because that speaks to the baseline human experience. Being an awful thing and wanting not to feel or seem like an awful thing, both for security reasons and, ironically, also for ego reasons. You want to elevate your ego without it without taking the risk of acknowledging what reality is and fighting to elevate your ego. You want to be you want the power without stepping on the demiurge's toes. I have no idea. I said last time we talked for 40 minutes and it felt like we both said all we could say and we got nowhere. This time it's 50 minutes. Once again, I feel like we've gotten nowhere. Maybe this is something you sense or you don't sense. Because I understand what I'm seeing and talking about perfectly. Crystalline. But trying to put it into words, you run into 75 security fences that I don't think it's any mistake are there. They're in place so you can't consolidate understanding or rally around understanding. The attack vector is important because it's the vector that's being used to attack, but it's important only because it's the attack vector. The thing that's actually important or should be important is the attack, the thing being pushed. But they've made this vector so fucking complicated and also so divisive. It's like the Alan Watts present and wrapping paper thing. The delivery system or the wrapping paper is just important as the present, even though the present is ostensibly the thing you're supposed to care about. But the wrapping paper or the vector is just as important, if not more important. And it's important here, or in other words, why are we not just talking about the fact that right-hand path shit is being pushed? It's because this stuff, sex and gender, anima and animus, is extraordinarily important to us. Meaning, if this is both an effective attack vector for right-hand path stuff, and also important enough to be verbally protected to this extent, there must be something super important, super valuable, super useful to understand in here if we can figure it out. Both to defend from what's going on and to understand what's going on. And then triple, to possibly use what they're doing for our benefit. But it's so far outside our scope, or they are so far above us in their tactics in this instance, it feels hopeless. And sometimes we talk about dealing with otherworldly things, but more so being aware of them, or when you interact with them, it's not something you see or smell or touch. Although it is an experience, because it's not understandable, the beyond is something necessarily you experience, but not in the way you typically experience things, because you can't understand it. That's why most of the time, all you have is an instinctive or instinctual awareness of something. This, I think, is one of the instances you do get to see in a sober and comprehensible state something otherworldly. You're watching this video, you're looking at the planet, you're looking at the way people interact. You're walking through the woods at night with a flashlight. You stumble upon an object that is clearly not from this world. You don't know what it is, you don't know what to do with it, but you can see it. That's the situation we're in right now with this right-hand path gender shit. This triple, quadruple, quintuple enigma of language that should just be an abstraction or mind puzzle. It's not. Look around you. It has brainwashed everybody and is ramping up. This is an engine. This is not just a brain teaser. This is a brainwasher emitter operating at a very high level. It's otherworldly. Right now, it is just comprehensible enough for you to see it and recognize it as something else. You don't have these moments very often. These moments in a sober state and in a comprehending way. You can look at something and recognize that it is not human. This thing, this knot, is from a higher dimension, but it's in a form that you can see it, and to an extent you can understand it and interact with it. And progress can be made, but you probably won't make it. Maybe you'll get aspects of it together. I really don't know what to do with this. Do you understand how alien this entire tactic is? What they've chosen to do and the way they've chosen to go about it? And what does it mean that it's here in this state? Because from all of your other seeking, you know these people or these things do not like doing things in comprehensible ways. Is this a fuck up? I don't think it is. Well, maybe it is. Just because it's complicated to you doesn't mean it's complicated to somebody else or something else. If it was intentional, then why is it intentional? Why is it necessary that this be comprehensible? A little bit. It's like if a nuclear reactor in medieval times came with a program that reflects light or morphs the environment around it. It's very important. It needs to be right here, but it is designed so perfectly and so far beyond you. If you hadn't run face first into it, you would not have known it was there. That's how this feels. Everything we've done, I'm not saying this is like some ultimate, if we can figure this out, we can resolve everything thing. I don't think that at all. It's just a tactic. It's just a tactic that is so far beyond, that is so clever, that it shouldn't, I don't see a way it could have come from this world. It is so perfect, is it? Everything you've done up to this point has led you to walking face first into a cloaked spaceship in the woods. And you're fucking with it and not really getting it. And once again, you're left with more questions than answers. But, hit myself on the head, forehead, facepalm. This is a video about masculinity and femininity. How can we summarize this part of this whole issue into one sentence? The contemporary gender binary is demonic because it is serving as a vessel for mystical brainwashing on a level people both won't perceive as brainwashing and can't do anything about because we have denied efforts to find alternatives. But what is there even to say about all this? We're in the idea equivalent of non-Euclidean stair space. You know what stairs are, you know what space is, but this is not the way stairs and space are supposed to work, yet they are. But although we can't do anything about this, are you able to appreciate what you're seeing here? Let's say this is all crazy shit, nonsense shit. There's no intentionality to it at all. Are you able to appreciate the terrible brilliance of this naturally occurring phenomenon then? What you're looking at is a piece of evidence that you understand is evidence, but you don't know how to process as evidence, or for evidence of what. I'm amazed at the utter impossibility of this. They have figured out a way to block communication without actually blocking your communication. Or we used the 1984 example earlier. This is like the equivalent. Well, it's not exactly the same because I think there is some mystical element to this, but for thoughts and giggles, you are a person who has been indoctrinated totally into Newspeak, to the extent that dude was talking about it going. And you're raised in it, and your brain thinks in that way, and then all of a sudden you get to understand both what Newspeak is, the limitations Newspeak imposes on you, and that you are living, your brain is operating in an impaired state. And you are totally aware of it, and you can see it, yet you are still bound by the chains you're wearing. For us, it's vital that gender is part of the aspect, but I'm in awe of what they've accomplished here. This is like killing a space marine with punji sticks. They've come down to our level and done something it's both technically within our ability to do. This isn't magic they've worked here, but the ability to do it, or the power that this gives, the effect it has, might as well be magic. What they've done is it's like showing fire to a caveman, but that gets my juices flowing, noggin jogging. You know what we should do? We need to think about this, and although we should try to untie the knot and solve the problem and all this normal shit, we need to study the mechanisms they used to make communication this impossible. Then we can deploy them. As a caveman, you might not understand what fire is chemically, but you can figure out, you can learn from the fucking scary space person how to make it, and then, left to your own devices, come up with ways to use it. And another part of this, while we're standing around in a circle looking at this thing, another part that amazes me is this is a piece of otherworldly brilliance. if there is such thing as evidence of outside forces, this is one of the instances. This is as close as we can get in a way that is not, using substances or trances or anything. This is something we can see, sober, look at it clearly, and yet I'm odd, but I'm also. It also feels so plain. You ever do something like go to the Grand Canyon and expect to be odd, and on some level it is awe-inspiring, but you don't feel awed or inspired? That's how this feels. This is evidence of something greater, and I'm amazed by it, and I'm also I'm not, like, my world hasn't changed. This is like the first person to find a dinosaur skeleton with no concept of the past. But we'll cut it here because I think we've done as much as we can for now, and I have no idea what to do with this or where to go with it in the directions I know that it could be gone in or gone with. That happened, you saw it, this exists now, you've seen it, and life goes on. That's the feeling. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.